Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Take30 today. Today's topic is connection points between Cognos Analytics and AWS, or Amazon Web Services. We are going to talk about a couple of different ways to draw those connection points, right? So the first is cloud storage. The next is connecting to AWS-based data sources. We're going to talk a bit about hosting Cognos Analytics on Amazon EC2. And then finally, we'll talk a bit about Cloud Pak for data on AWS. And for those the last two items, we'll talk a bit about the considerations and thought process you should have when engaging in that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is call out some upcoming sessions. So today's topic I just went through. In upcoming weeks, we're going to talk about best practices for moving analytics to the cloud. We're going to do a deep dive on some of the features in 11.1.7 Cognos Analytics that we had Rachel Sue cover 2 weeks ago. We're going to talk about how Snowflake can help your data science team. Then we'll talk about the Cognos audit extension, and then we'll get into some Snowflake best practices. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is launch a poll. So this is about, what is your organization's alignment to cloud analytics? So it looks like most folks are still focused on their on-prem model, and we've got organizations who are still working on their cloud strategy. No attendees today are operating under a mandate to move to the cloud. Okay, thank you for taking the poll. And as a reminder, we still are running the Take30 one-on-ones, the one-to-one. So if you want to set aside 20 to 30 minutes with one of Ironside's practice leads and our technical experts, just go ahead and go to our website and sign up. And we're happy to have that conversation. All right, so in terms of the panelists today, it's myself. My name is Scott Masage. I'm the practice director for BI at Ironside. Been here for, I think it'll be 8 years in a couple of weeks. And Chris, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Chris Eller. I'm the AWS practice lead at Ironside, working with customers on how they can leverage some of the native services within the AWS data portfolio, in addition to how strategic partners like IBM and their technologies can best be deployed and leveraged on the AWS platform.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so certainly every day we see more and more organizations moving their applications and workloads to the cloud. Gartner recently came out and said that, look, cloud computing is firmly established as the new normal for enterprise IT, right? So cloud computing is everywhere, and there's a lot of pressure inside organizations to move there for a number of different reasons. So, if you are an organization supporting Cognos Analytics, how can you, given that this shift is occurring and it's impacting us all, how can you provide for analytics continuity during this shift? And, what are the opportunities that are coming available due to the shift, right? So we want to focus, the focus of this presentation is going to be on those things. Some of the approaches here we're going to talk about are very simple. Other ones are more complex. But we wanted to give you that full span. Okay. So the first opportunity to leverage the cloud with Cognos Analytics is something called cloud storage. So this came out in version 11.1, and it allows you to configure Cognos such that users can save their report output to the cloud. And I'll give a quick demonstration of this, but I wanted to walk through the steps, right? So the first thing you're going to do from an AWS perspective is set up AWS S3, which is the storage service, and create a user with programmatic access and capture the appropriate keys. Then inside of Cognos, you will create a connection to S3, set up that storage connection in Cognos Analytics, add a location or a bucket to the storage connection, test it out, and then start to use it. So, why would I want to use this? All right, why is this functionality important? So many organizations are kind of refocusing their storage on S3, this might allow you to make content available to broader audiences and applications for distribution or ease of consumption. So, you may want to create a process to script the distribution of content, perhaps to or store it in a centralized repository like SharePoint. And this allows you a landing spot outside of Cognos where you can create scripts to pick that up and move it around. Certainly proper licensing applies here, so be mindful of that. So with that, I will show you a demonstration of this. If I go to, so I've got in my content a demonstration report. So I've got this cloud storage demo report. To be able to invoke the cloud storage to see how it works, I want to say run as, and then I've got this dialog. I want to run the report in the background. I want to choose my format. So in this case, let me choose PDF. Okay. And now for delivery, I want to say save to cloud. Okay. And it's important that I go here to the edit details so I choose the appropriate storage location. So in terms of the connection, I've created a connection object called Cognos S3 bucket. And then the location, which is the actual bucket, I have called the EC2 Cognos bucket. So with those choices made, I will click on run, and then I should get a dialog that confirms that this ran successfully. All right, so the request to run that report was successful. Okay, so if I go to my S3 bucket here and refresh, okay, you'll notice that 10:14 a.m. I've got this PDF output, so I can click on that, I can open it and look at it here. And I'll move it over here. And there's my output. Okay, so pretty easy to do. You need an S3 account, you need some credentials, pretty easy to accomplish. Okay, so let us move on. And certainly if you have questions, feel free to ask them, and we'll make sure that they we get answered as we go through. Okay. Okay, so the next way that you can connect together Cognos and AWS is to leverage AWS data sources. So for a while now, Cognos Analytics has had the ability to connect to AWS native and AWS hosted data sources. So things like Redshift, things like Athena, right? So Athena is a way to access files in S3 as SQL. AWS RDS, so things like Aurora, Microsoft SQL, Oracle, Postgres, MySQL, and MariaDB, and then other data sources that run in AWS like Snowflake. So you can connect to AWS data sources using either data server connections, right, which is the kind of the new way. So that is the way to connect to a data source without having to need an FM model, right? That was released in 11.0. But then also the traditional data source connections that we've seen in Cognos since the ReportNet days. And typically that's done with a JDBC connection. So, again, using a JDBC connection requires dynamic query mode. Your JVM settings should be increased to between 8 and 16 gigabytes. And your dispatcher should have at least 32 gigabytes of RAM to do this. But understand that in some cases, you can leverage the compatible query mode with ODBC. However, DQM will typically offer better performance. So one thing to note here is that the content store database, so not your reporting databases, but your content store database is still limited to Microsoft SQL, Oracle, DB2, and Informix. Okay, so the next topic I want to cover here, and I know that Chris will chime in as well, is hosting Cognos analytics on EC2, which is Amazon's elastic compute service. So EC2 again is a hosting service on AWS. It offers various server instances that are available for users to build and host solutions with resizable computing capacity in Amazon's data centers. So to use EC2, you can leverage an Amazon machine image or an AMI as appropriate for the server role, right? So this EC2 instance, is it going to be your dispatcher? Is it going to be your content store database server? Might it be a gateway, right? And you can size, might it be a dev instance or a QA instance or a prod instance, right? So you can alter the sizing of those machine images as appropriate. In terms of how you set this up, there's some basic steps. So the first is to create an AWS account and get into the management console. So then you want to build the appropriate networking. So setting up DNS, setting up any routing and security groups, setting up VPCs, and connectivity to on-prem if necessary. So if you have a database that's on-prem and you want to put Cognos Analytics on EC2, there's you can connect back to your on-prem databases, right? Not every organization moves all of their analytics ecosystem to the cloud at once. Okay, so you can create an AMI to launch one or more instances. You can configure load balancing. You would then connect to the instances that you create with RDP in a Windows scenario or SSH in a Linux scenario. Install and configure Cognos Analytics as appropriate. Configure Cognos, start Cognos, configure the security, and you are ready to go. Okay.
Yeah, I would just add a couple points there, Scott. Is as you start to move and build out onto AWS, you need to start thinking a little bit differently, about some of these topics, in particular, all these topics, of course, but also the encryption, right? So most customers are moving from their data centers onto AWS, which is a public cloud, and really working closely with your security teams to understand, all right, as I move to the cloud, do I have particular regulatory and compliance that I need to make sure that I'm adhering to, which may change some of the behavior than what I did on-prem. So these are the types of things that we're working with clients to balance and implement appropriately.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So yeah, so Chris got into some of the considerations here, and I'll dive a little deeper. So the first is licensing, right? So some organizations have user-based licensing, some have capacity-based licensing. So this is that would be the PVU licensing model, right? So from an IBM perspective, when they look at Cognos being run on EC2, they see H virtual CPU in EC2 as 70 PVU, right? So if you are licensed via a capacity-based model, it's you need to consider you need to consider things, the size of your environment, right? You don't want to violate the terms of your license agreement. There's a link here to the bring your own license, so BYOSL, bring your own software license policy that IBM has. Also things to consider, which Amazon regions and availability zones do you want to have your EC2 instance in? If your users are mostly located in one geographic area, that's a consideration, right? Chris talked a bit about compliance and security guidelines, right? When it comes to encryption, do we need encryption at rest and in transit? How do we manage those certificates? Is there a common security framework that you've applied to all your other AWS applications? And how do you think Cognos fits into that? What about things like centralized logging, right? So these are all things you should be thinking about. In terms of, so know that EC2 is auto scaling, right? So is there an opportunity to look at your usage patterns to explore cost optimization, right? Is if you will, is the shape of your usage lumpy, right? Having used Cognos or having experienced Cognos environments for 20 years, it's not the same level of activity every day in every organization, right? There's usually kind of a month end build, right? That's when you have your peaks. So with EC2, you have the ability to sort of pull back on the resources until that peak and then spin up for that peak. And in doing that, you are going to satisfy your user community, right? You're going to offer them the right amount of performance to get their analytics done, but you're optimizing your costs, okay? And and again, that's a feature called auto scaling, and there are a couple of ways to get that done right. There's a cost associated with EC2. Think about the storage, right? So AWS EBS block storage, right? How much do you need? What about your content store database? Is that something that you want to run in RDS, which we would recommend? Or do you want to install it on the EC2 instance and have a specific content store database EC2 instance? Things of that nature, right? These are all kind of considerations you need to consider. Security. Today you might have Active Directory on-prem. Well, how would that work, right? What about SSO? Also, what about change management, right? So in an on-prem environment, you likely have a dev instance, a QA instance, and a prod instance. How might you do that? How might you replicate that thing, that change management approach in the AWS cloud, right? We generally see people or organizations leveraging different accounts, right? So different AWS accounts for each of those layers in their change management methodology. I don't know, Chris, if you had anything you wanted to add here as well.
No, you did great.
Okay. Okay. So the other, right, so we talked about Cognos Analytics on EC2, which is sort of closer to the on-prem experience than this thing that I'm about to talk about, right? So Cloud Pak for Data is no doubt something you've heard of. We have had a couple of different Take30 sessions on the topic. So if you're interested in finding out more about it, I strongly suggest reviewing those recorded sessions. The way to think about it at a very high level is that IBM has put together a whole bunch of functionality in a kind of a best of stack approach with a number of different IBM technologies, and put it into a container that you can put on public, private, or hybrid clouds. Right? It's based on Red Hat OpenShift, which is a scalable foundation for containerized applications. To get closer to parity with what is offered in on-prem Cognos, you need to add to Cloud Pak for Data something called the Cognos Analytics cartridge. Okay, and one of the things that's available within AWS is something called the AWS Quick Start for Cloud Pak for Data. So what is that? So there's yet another AWS service called CloudFormation, and you can consider, think about CloudFormation as infrastructure as code. So literally, it's JSON that is run, and it goes ahead and creates the environment for you. Okay, and this diagram here is a representation of what you get when you run the AWS Quick Start for Cloud Pak. I won't go too far into the details here because it's this is something that is we've covered it in other areas, and I think the Cognos piece we might have as a separate Take30 all of its own. But understand it's, again, infrastructure is code, and this gets created for you. And there are inputs required, but as you go through the process, but it's pretty straightforward. The high level is that it defines a high availability architecture that spans from 1 to 3 availability zones. It has public and private subnets, and it's all built in alignment with what is known as the AWS well-architected framework. Okay. Okay. So, as we've kind of given an inkling here, and no doubt you've seen, there are a lot of services inside of AWS and a lot of moving pieces, a lot of things to consider, putting Cognos into AWS. You wouldn't spinning up Cognos in AWS is not simply you putting Cognos on an island, right? There's context here, and all of these services provide that context. So many of the same considerations that we just talked about with EC2, Cognos running on EC2, they apply here as well. And certainly we've been helping clients explore this. We've got a lot of lessons learned, and we continue to help them through the process. So Chris, and I don't know if you want to add in here as well.
Yeah, so I think the important thing that we're trying to express here in this slide is customers' journey to AWS and other cloud platforms are very holistic. And when we think about either the deployment of Cognos or OpenShift with the Cloud Pak for data, it's how are we then making the value of those platforms work with the other corporate standards and the other things that you're doing in AWS, right? So as Scott mentioned before, centralized monitoring standards, logging standards. How are you going about spend management? How are you managing your security configurations in the cloud, and other types of governance and best practices that you're doing for AWS? And what we're working through is, and advising customers on, is how are we mirroring, and we should call things kind of best of breed, I guess, right? But within the stack in public cloud, what are the best parts that you should be using when you deploy Cloud Pak for data in this kind of like best of stack? So it's a very, this is a bit of the topic of the day, and what we're advising customers to as they build out these platforms.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Okay, so that is that's the end of our prepared content. So we'll open it up for questions. All right, so question about what types of AWS EC2 instances would you recommend for Cognos? Okay, so a little bit of background, right? When you select an EC2 instance to build, one of the considerations is kind of the cost model, right? So there are many different kinds. You'd want to avoid instance types like Spot that wouldn't make sense, right? That is kind of when it's sort of a pricing mechanism where you set the amount you want to pay, and when resources become available at that level, they're given to you. So that wouldn't make sense for an environment like Cognos. So generally, we'd suggest focusing on reserved or dedicated instances, but it really depends on your contract type and your isolation and performance requirements. But good question. Okay. Does does Cloud Pak for data, at least the Cognos cartridge, support CQM, or so compatible query mode? It does not at the present time. At the present time, DQM, so dynamic query mode, is supported, but not CQM. Okay, so another Cloud Pak question. So does the Cognos cartridge on Cloud Pak for data support single sign-on? So at the present time, it does not. However, this has been called out as a roadmap item, right? So that is something we will be seeing in the future. Okay, so with that, we will conclude the Take30, and I want to thank you all for joining, and thank you, Chris, for jumping in as well. And we look forward to having you join us in the next Take30, which is on the Modern Analytics platform, which is on Tuesday of next week. Thank you very much.